Welcome to Fast Pace, the new growth, leadership and management podcast featuring Josh Phegan and Dean Mackey. We wanted to peel back the layers on what happens in the world of fast-paced real estate agencies, from new leadership models to the management challenges we all face each day. This is about a new era in the estate agency sector. Rapid changes to business models, service lines, remuneration and growth present the greatest opportunities that we've ever seen. Sit back, get inspired, grow your skills and reimagine what's possible with Fast Pace. Every Friday, wherever you get your podcasts, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts and Josh Phegan Digital. Welcome to our special one-off edition of Fast Pace, and today we're going to talk about the importance of having a one-page strategic plan. Now, no matter who you are inside of the business, whether or not you're the CEO, the head of operations, head of sales, head of property management, or any other service line, or even just someone inside of the business that's actually helping to make things happen, it is really important to make sure that you reduce the friction and you get 100% alignment. So what actually makes up a really good quality one-page strategic plan? Well, ultimately, something that's actually accessible to every single person inside the organization who is in charge of actually delivering those very specific strategies. Now, if you think about it, a business is actually a set of strategies about how you're going to go and play the game. And we like to think that business is ultimately the ultimate sport. And if you think about it, you're assembling the very best team to go against the toughest competitors in the marketplace and ultimately to win every year. And you're going to win every year based on top line revenue, market share, and profitability of your business entity. Now, in order to build an enduring great business, you should always build it as though it's going to be sale ready. So in other words, if you had to sell the business, what would you be pitching to a group of venture capitalists or someone who might be wanting to buy your business around the strategic plan that you've got for what's going to be ahead? Now, what we start to think about is that when we build out a strategic plan, we really want to know where the business is ultimately going. And that's going to be built up of the clarity around the purpose, or the unending, enduring thing that ultimately the business is trying to do, the mission, the very specific numbers that you're trying to achieve in terms of your sales numbers, size of property management business, or market share penetration, right the way down to the values of how you actually play out the game, the rules by which you play on a day-by-day basis. What then happens from there is we then start to think about the very clear points of the strategy of how we're actually going to do that, combined then with the individual tactics that actually form that strategy, and then ultimately the measurement about how we know whether or not we're actually doing well with that particular strategy in market. So I like to think about your one-page plan as having three very specific areas, particularly as a business owner or shareholder. And the first conversation is to think about sales, property management, and balance sheet. So when you go to think about sales, what is the strategy of how you're actually going to take your enterprise and to substantially increase market share, or to be in a position that ultimately you can diversify that particular sales stream income so it's not dependent upon a key writer? Now, the first job here is to start to think about what is our strategic approach on how we're going to do that. Now, to be able to boom sales, one of your strategies, for example, might be about going back to all of your past clients. And tactically, you're going to do that with an annual checkup call and maybe some call sessions like a Back to the Future like Marty McFly, where you get everyone on the phone to go and offer an annual checkup to all of the past clients inside the business. And the measurement would be the number of annual checkups that have actually been booked. Maybe in your sales division, one of the biggest opportunities might be about previous market appraisals. So the strategy is to say, okay, we're going to get more of those market appraisals onto the market today. And the way that we're going to do that is that tactically, we're going to start to categorize our market appraisals based on the problem type of the client. What we know is that the bigger the problem, the more likely it is that a customer will move at some level of progress. What we then identify is that there are big opportunities sitting inside of these data sets. And one is about really understanding how many of those actual market appraisals are actually buyers sellers. In other words, they would need to sell their property in order to be able to go and buy another. Now, when we get very clear about that, how many of those people are we calling on a daily or weekly basis when a relevant property comes to market that's either similar to the one that they own or similar to the one of type of property that they'd like to buy in terms of aspirational listings. And this is what great agents really do. So all of a sudden, you can start to really bury yourself quite quickly about what is actually the strategic plan on how we're going to build our sales market share. Now, one of those strategies might be about recruiting existing talent, or maybe even a merger and acquisition with a competitor to be able to buy access to talent that already has the market share that you want. Now, beyond that, you then start to think, okay, do I have that clearly in a one-page plan with just a couple of dot points around what our strategy is on how we go to nail it at a sales level, what it is that we're actually going to go to do in terms of the specific tactics, and then what the measurement is around every single one of those individual points. Now, beyond that, we then actually go and have a look at what actually happens in our property management business. Now, in the property management business, one of our strategies to grow the portfolio might be to launch an investors or landlords first email service, which actually lists all the properties that we currently have available for sale or auction that already have a lease in play. And maybe identify the properties that we know they're in a position that would lease really well. Or maybe identify the properties that already have development potential subject to council approval due to the end of lease or the end of life on a particular building. Or maybe, for example, that there's been a change in development overlays which allows for higher density construction on that particular site. Maybe one of the other great conversations that when we start to think tactically about how we do that is that let's call every single one of our landlords and identify whether or not they have another property in their portfolio that we might be able to manage. Maybe we could get them to buy another property to add to their portfolio, or maybe we could go after their principal place of residence to actually give them a market appraisal on what that property is worth, so then they can make the decision around what they do with their equity, or maybe actually trade that to go and buy a better principal place of residence. The second conversation inside of any property management business is to strategically go after all of the archive landlords, people that ultimately may have had an investment property with us. They either took it to a rival competitor, moved back into it, or maybe sold that investment property. Where do those landlords actually live? And how many of those landlords would actually like to go and add another property to their portfolio? So you get the idea, because by the time we get down into balance sheet, one of our strategic opportunities may well be about buying a building. And ultimately, our tactics are about saving some funds for a deposit, getting some finance approved, finding the right building, getting into that building, making that happen. And the measurement as to whether or not we've put ourselves in a position of ownership. So that way, the cash flow that we use to pay our rent is actually paying off an asset. So we've got something to go be able to sell later on down the track. One of the other balance sheet items is obviously growing our property management business. Another strategy, for example, may also about being able to open an additional service line. Let's say, for example, that you added commercial to your existing business, but you brought in a commercial partner who already had runs on the board in relation to that particular section of your service lines. What's really important is that when I go into a lot of businesses, I say, hey guys, tell me what's the plan. And, people have got this whole idea in their head of what's actually going to be happening. When it actually comes back down to the tactical day-to-day, it's not documented. And a plan that's not documented is not a plan that can actually happen, because you need to make sure that all of the people inside of your leadership team are actually understanding of what we're trying to do today. And that ultimately, if the strategy isn't working, is it because we're not actually at a high level of capability in being able to deliver the tactics? Or do we not have the measurement to know that things are on or off track? So what I love to do inside of any business is I say, okay, great, let's build out that one-page plan. And it consists of a couple of very simple things. What's the purpose of the business? What's the mission? So over the course of the next 5 years, how big do we plan to be? Like at the end of the day, you signed a commercial lease on your building. So how big is the business going to be 5 years down the track in terms of sales, property management, and additional service lines you may be considering? What are the values that sit inside of the business so we can clearly see whether or not people are living out those values in the business? And then when we go down and we have a look at our sales, property management, and balance sheet items as an example, what are the strategies that we've got in play? What are the specific tactics we've got in play? And what are the measurement items that we've got in play so we know when to sound the alarm because the strategies aren't working? And this is one of the greatest challenges in business, is the ability to be able to have the discipline to do things day by day that are actually going to build up for much bigger results. And it's around that whole idea that there's a lot of people that got a million ideas but never land any of them. And what we're talking about is getting really clear about what are the specific strategies that we're putting into our business that we know will move the needle the most. And if we get it to move the needle the most, then it changes everything about the way that foundationally we go to operate. So in being a great business person, make sure that you spend the time with all of your leadership team to actually have a conversation around what your strategic plan looks like. Have a look at the strengths to leverage, your strengths to develop. Get very clear about what it is that you're actually doing so that when you set that strategy, you can go at it at full speed and actually get the tactics in play to land the measurement and ultimately to achieve your ultimate business growth. I really hope you enjoyed that special edition of our Fast Paced podcast.